rise to speak to this bill, which is basically laced with hypocrisy, because this bill does nothing. It's got one side of the picture in terms of private sector, but it doesn't mention anything about money coming from unions. It doesn't mention anything about money coming from super funds, and it doesn't mention anything about the inherent influence inside bureaucracies. Now, I know that the promoter of this actual bill worked for the Environmental Defender's Office for about a decade, and of course she's just one of many left-wing Marxists in the bureaucracy who get paid by the taxpayer to be impartial. But I have no doubt that this is a scheme that's employed by the left. Whenever you talk about any environmental stuff, they always run off to the Environmental Defender's Office and then use the law and use the legislative, what do they call it, lawfare, to effectively shut down any sort of new production. And we have this slur going around, fossil fuel, we can't have money from fossil fuel donors, and somehow a diesel fuel rebate is somehow some sort of a rort. If you want to know what a rort is, it's the people who live in these inner-city houses. The biggest tax expenditure discount in the budget is the CGT grant on wealthy houses in inner-city electorates. And yet these same hypocrites come in here and call the actual diesel fuel rebate that is incurred by producers who don't go anywhere near a road a rort. That is not the case at all. Farmers have to actually, when they plant their crops, don't go anywhere near a farm. I myself am from a farm of 150,000 acres. It could take you 2 hours to get to the boundary just to go and check your waters. I mean, we would drive thousands of kilometres a year just to check our waters, the bores, and somehow we're meant to pay for roads we don't use. How is this somehow a rort? And as for I noticed there's a key word in there that we're going to exclude people that volunteer their time. Well, the thing is, in the private sector with small business, if you didn't actually know, small business works 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. They don't always have the time to actually to donate to the parties. That's why they decide to actually give money, because they go, look, we'd love to help you out. We don't actually have the time, but look, use it for advertising or whatever. So there's this implication that all donations are bad. And look, I don't like gambling any more than a lot of people in this chamber do. But the fact of the matter is that was brought in by a crony deal between the Goss Labor government and Kevin Rudd, who was the Chief of Staff at the time, and the unions, who wanted to bring gambling into Queensland. And what have we got for it? Well, I'll tell you what regional Queensland got for it: nothing. What we've got is a lot of heartache. I mean, my hometown of Chinchilla, I've said this hundreds of times, when I grew up there, we didn't have any poker machines in the pubs in Chinchilla, but we had a maternity ward, we had a council, but we don't seem to have a maternity ward or a council anymore, but we've got poker machines. So you got no one's going to be influencing me, and can I say no one does influence me when it comes to donations. But the other thing that this bill completely overlooks as well is the influence of lobbyists who don't have to disclose how much people pay them. That's the real. You want to know what the real shadow government in this country is? It's the bureaucracies who are stacked with left-wing supporters, and they are left-wing supporters, and the lack of accountability in these so-called independent bodies. I mean, I've just did a post again this morning. It's about my 10th one on the RBA, how they refuse to actually bring our gold home. They refuse to do a proper audit. There's no accountability there. There's no accountability. I mean, I'll give you another great example. The Bureau of Meteorology just used to have the weather division, and these guys would go out and they'd measure the temperature, or they'd record the temperature, and that was it. End of story. But now they have this whole new division called the Climate Division, and their job is to go and create new sets of data that's been manipulated from the original raw data. They wrap big words around it like homogenisation, etc., so that most people don't even understand what they're talking about, but it's actually manipulated data. You don't actually go back and create a new data set, fudge the data. You report the original data with a margin of error. That's what you should be doing, but that's not what these guys do. And then I've spoken to the ABC, another so-called independent body, why when they report this data, they don't actually distinguish between homogenised data and raw data. Why don't they report the raw data with a margin of error? That's how you do it. In the private sector, if you went back and started coming up 3, 4, 5 sets of different accounts, a la Al Capone style, you'd be thrown in jail. But no, not within the bureaucracy, because it doesn't suit the narrative of the bureaucracy that maybe the temperature hasn't risen as high as much as what they claim it to be, and it hasn't. The raw data doesn't show anywhere near the increase in temperature as what the homogenised data is. So that's just another example of the influence that can be coming not from money, but from the use of volunteer or paid power, when people who are paid by the taxpayer to deliver goods and services aren't actually delivering goods and services at all. What they're doing is using the bureaucracy to push their own ideology, and that is corruption. That is corruption. And then we go to the hypocrisy here of this bill again with superannuation. The first thing the Labor government did when they got in was to actually try and remove— well, they did remove the disclosure laws around how much money superannuation funds donate to political parties via the unions or whatever. Did the Greens vote for greater transparency there? No, I don't think they did. They didn't do that. What about the pharma industry, big pharma? I'm not talking about pharmacies, by the way, Senator McGrath. I'm talking about big pharma. Did the Greens back our bill to actually get that contract disclosed? No, they didn't. No, they didn't. And if we go and look at who the Greens' all-time biggest donor is, it's none other than Graham Wood, a guy that made his millions through travelling, for basically an online booking agent for people to travel the world. How much CO2 does travelling the world actually consume? And they've got the height to come in here and cast slurs on our primary producers, our miners and our farmers, that somehow these guys are bad. But it's the gross hypocrisy. And if we look at the Victorian Greens Party, their biggest donor was, of course, the Electrical Trades Union. The Electrical Trades Union. Now, of course, they'd be making a lot of money out of wiring all of these solar panels and these wind turbines that we can't recycle and all the batteries that are going to be installed. Can you see the connection between the Electrical Trades Union, that's going to get paid a lot of money, a lot of jobs for the Sparkies, by setting up all of this new electrical wiring? And think of all the transmission lines that are going to be ripping the guts out of, scarring our beautiful landscape. Think of all the dead koalas from these transmission lines, the dead wombats from these EVs with greater braking speeds. Think of that. Think of that. That's terrible. All those inner-city elites, as they're driving down from their North Shore suburbs or the inner city of Melbourne, as they drive up to the snow every year when there's extra EV cars with an 800-kilogram battery in the middle of it that increases the braking the speed. The hypocrisy of these people is breathtaking. And that was another comment I heard: accelerated depreciation is somehow wrought. No. If you're going to drop $1 million on a tractor, and it costs a lot of money to buy a tractor to go around and around, you won't sell that tractor again anytime soon for anywhere near $1 million. It costs a lot of money for big capital-intensive equipment, and to somehow claim that getting a tax deduction for a genuine cost of doing business is somehow a rort, it's just absurd. It is just absurd. But yet again, we have the Greens that are completely divorced from reality. They don't seem to understand that small business in this country don't have the time to go out and campaign. And we saw that, and the other great big hypocrisy in all of this is with the Teals, for example. I mean, their biggest funder, of course, is Simon Holmes à Court, and he's got his wealth from his father, Robert Holmes à Court, who made lots of money in the 80s from investing in mining companies. And yet again, we have this classic hypocrisy. Don't worry about where my wealth came from. Once I've got my millions, I'm then going to do the backflip and suddenly start being holier than thou to alleviate my guilt. And, it's like, I know Senator Pocock often talks about he grew up on a farm and he respects the farmers. Well, I suggest, Senator Pocock, if you want to come out to our property one day and look at how far it takes to drive from our house out to our boundaries and how much petrol we spend a year. And by the way, my dad never claimed diesel fuel rebate. I used to tell him to get and do it because he just won't take any sort of handout from the government. Or he doesn't, just doesn't want anything to do with government. He doesn't want the government in his life. That's why he lives on a property 150,000 acres, miles from anywhere. And obviously I've inherited some of his traits, because that's how I feel when it comes to government as well. Hey? Yeah, no, I came to the Senate to get government out of my life. Order. To get government out of my life. Order. Thanks very much, Senator Shoebridge, and I enjoy your interjections, and you'll quickly learn that you won't get away with it with me, because I will eviscerate you. My intelligence is we'll put you back in your spot very, very quickly. And
Senator Rennick, just pause for a moment. Interjections are always disorderly, so if everybody could just enjoy each other's company and enjoy Senator Rennick's speech in silence, please. Thank you, Senator Rennick.
Senator McGrath. And it's always I might just I look at these figures and I ask myself, where will we end up with? And of course, the other thing we haven't spoken about, and I must touch on this, of course, is the influence of the childcare industry. Because I've often said, and you've only got to look at the union movement in this country, they're down to about 10% of the workers. And the reason why they grasp onto our children and childcare is their only growing union in this country is the actual United Voice because of the rapid increase in childcare. Now, these people say they want to, look after our children. I don't want the government looking after our children. I want that childcare payment going directly to the parent and letting the parent choose, just like when it comes to the transgender stuff, letting the parent decide. Because when it comes to our space in this country, the government doesn't invade our personal space. And there's too much of that happening with big government, and I've seen that since I've come down here, whether it's childcare, whether it's what sort of, how we look after our health, you name it, how we save our money. The unions and big government and the bureaucracy, they are the true shadow government of this country, and they have no accountability. And if you want to, and this is the hypocrisy of this bill, when we tried to move bills or amendments to get greater transparency over costings on reaching the 43% target by 2030, don't have a clue. Don't have a clue. Senator McAllister doesn't have a clue on how many kilometres of transmission lines we need to reach that target by 2030. They don't have a clue on how many batteries, how much energy needs to be stored, and they certainly have no idea on costings. We've done the same for the pharmaceutical contracts. I'm about to bring up another OPD on the Auditor-General. The Auditor-General came out, another ex-Labor staffer, didn't declare he was an ex-Labor staffer when he applied for the job, seemed to think that was 30, 40 years ago, so it didn't matter, but yet again it matters, because a leopard doesn't change their spots. So if you want to declare, if you want to get all this stuff and tamp down on donations, I think every bureaucrat in this country should be made declare who they vote for at every election, so we know whether or not they're impartial. They shouldn't be allowed to vote. That would be their way. Once you become a bureaucrat, you've got to be completely impartial. Don't let them vote, or we can make them disclose which way they vote. So we know how they think, because for too long these guys have been running a protection racket for the left side of politics. And we actually had one public servant in estimates started, saying "we the government, we the government." He got, Senator Holly Hughes very quickly picked up on the fact that he should have actually been impartial. But as I said, if you want to know who really controls this government, it's the bureaucrats and the unions and the super funds and the big end of town, the inner city elites. It's not the battlers. It's not the battlers. Okay, they're out there. They're voiceless. They're voiceless. And most of them are too busy working. I mean, whether you like it or not in this country, politics is only followed by a very small slither of people in this country. And it's a genuine, and most of the reason why is because they're too busy working. They're too busy working. Now, some people, when they get later in life and they have a bit of money, they might want to donate to the party. They may want to donate to the party. But no. This bill will destroy the right to exercise their right to participate in democracy, because they don't always have the time. They don't always have the time of young uni students who, like that's how Josh got rolled. Basically, the Teals got about a couple of thousand people to go door knocking, paid them $40. Paid them $40. I wonder is it going to apply to the Teals who pay their volunteers to go door knocking? Is this bill going to apply to that? Is this going to because this says non-volunteer labour? So how does it work out when the Teals and the Greens pay their volunteers to go door knocking? Is that yeah? They're not volunteers. That's right. So they should be called out as well. We're going to make every little volunteer disclose how much they're getting paid. We're going to do that? No, of course not. Of course not. So if we want to have true democracy in this country, and I'm all for disclosure, but this is one-sided. This is one-sided. So next time I'll bring that big pharmaceutical bill up, Senator Walters, and see whether or not you want to vote on what we spent the $8 billion for with these vaccines. Senator Waters, and what we spent what we got for that and what was in that deal. But you didn't do that, so I don't want to hear any big end of town you know, how you're against the big end of town, because every time we try and wedge you guys on making the big end of town more transparent, you always vote with Labor, because we know that Mr Albanese, and I'll be putting the bureaucrats up to ICAC. I'm going to have a lot of fun doing this, because Mr Albanese, the Prime Minister, will shut that down.
Thank you, Senator Rennick.
Authorised G. Rennick, LNP Chair.